Welcome, everyone, to the Jake Dunlap Show. This is your weekly dose of real success stories from entrepreneurs, athletes, celebrities, CEOs, and the people that you love. If you've ever wondered what makes people tick, what are the weird things that happened to them in their past that help to shape the people that they've became, every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern, you can tune in and get exactly that. The behind the scenes, not the typical behind the scenes, but the real stories that shape some of the people that you know, love, and follow. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. Today's episode should really, I think, inspire a lot of people. One, to really hear stories about organizations that are going through transformation, and then, an individual who's really trying to transform an industry. With over 20 years of experience as an international business leader in the intelligence information management sector, today's guest has acquired a successful track record of profitably growing and transforming international businesses. He's also been volunteering and been a member of the Association for Intelligent Information Management, where he's held various roles, chairman, treasurer, etc. This guy is the go-to for information management and transformation. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Martin Birch. Martin, welcome to the show.
Jake, thank you very much. And that was such a good build-up. That must have been written by my mother.
We'll give a shout out to Bogdan. They do a good job of giving.
They did a great
by the way,
job.
and that was an abbreviated version. I've got like a version 2 in here that I could have pulled out too, but I'll pull it out at different phases here. So like every other guest in the show, we'd like to tell the backstory. I think you in particular have a very interesting backstory. Born, we were just talking about before, born right outside of London, kind of at the beginning of the first wave of technology in Wokingham. And so tell me a little bit, what were some of the lessons that you remember, whether it's from your parents or, around business or different things that they taught you as you were, growing up at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jake, because we all have influences that have influenced our lives. And, my parents were fantastic influences. They taught me really the value of hard work and getting out there and making things happen. But alongside that, one of the greatest influences in my life that I name-check regularly was my grandmother. My grandmother had, as often grandmothers do, this wisdom of ages, and she had a unique way of looking at things, and she had many wonderful phrases, some humorous, many humorous, but then many that were important. And I'll give you an example of the humorous one first. Back in the day, 30 years ago or so, there was a phase of cars having these bumper stickers, and you'd have these stickers on the bumpers. You remember them. I Love New York was a very popular one. And the English have a particular sense of humor. And so one of these bumper stickers, I remember following this car with my grandmother beside me. And we saw this car and it had the bumper sticker and it had warning, blind driver. And my grandmother just turned to me and she said, "It's amazing what they can do for them these days, isn't it?" So that was just an example of a sense of humor with life generally. But she taught me some very valuable life lessons. And one of them, we've actually incorporated into our values here at IBML. And that was do the right thing. So my grandmother taught me from a very early age. She said, do the right thing in everything in your life. If you always do the right thing, you never have to worry about anything. And that really stuck with me, Jake. And we have some values at IBML that the whole company sign up to. And one of those values is we do the right thing. And that's we do the right thing for our employees, we do the right thing for our customers, and we do the right thing for our owners. And that's the foundation of a successful company, I believe.
Well, I think, and I'm going to come back to that because I think I also want to get into, when you think about do the right thing, there are these kind of universal truths. And then I think sometimes there's tough decisions or things that have to get done, whether it's for the safety of the business or for things that need to get done. And so I want to double click on that. And I'll come back to it. The next thing I want to, kind of understand, and again, I agree 100%. And that's part of why we go back. And sometimes we go further back as well too. is we all have these kind of moments that shape us. Was there like a specific moment? You talked about like your grandma sharing that anecdote with you. Was there like a specific moment, where like you really kind of realized the importance of that, where you were like, okay, I'm going to choose to behave this way? Like, was there like something that happened early on or later in life?
So I couldn't give you one example, but I think every time in my life I've had a situation where there was tough decisions to be made. I think that's when you try and fall back on your core values. And that one for me has been one that all throughout my life has helped me, because I couldn't give you any one example, because there's many times, in personal life and in business. And I think you're faced with these choices. And every time you have a choice, and you can go one way or the other way. And I think if you always set yourself out, and if it's a difficult decision, you say to yourself, what is the right decision? What's the right way here? And I think if you do that, you always end up in a good place.
Okay. All right. I can get down with that. I think, I think sometimes the right decision, I think also doesn't always mean, what's the right word here? Not nice isn't the right word, but it doesn't always mean the easy decision. And I think sometimes we confuse nice and easy, where it's like, well, let's say you've got a performing employee or an issue in a department. Sometimes I think we think, oh, the right thing is to do the nice thing. And I think what I've seen too, I'd be curious to get your take, is that, sometimes the nice thing is not the right thing.
Yeah, and I think culture comes to mind there, Jake, because culture is a living, breathing thing in any organization, and it's not something you can impose. You cannot tell people what the culture is. You can try, but the culture will develop on its own. But you've got to put the right things in place that help the right culture develop. And a big part of that is people. And you may have top performing people that maybe are not a cultural fit. And that could be harmful to the greater organization. And so sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the sake of the culture. But the overall company, the wider company and the wider employees ultimately always thank you for it.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's now or 3 years later, as a part of this. So I want to go to like a very, kind of like earlier point in your career. I want to talk a little bit about being at Kodak. I think, you were at what was NCAD, which is a Kodak company, and then went on to Eastman Kodak, a few years later. And this is right at like the beginning of kind of that big tech boom, like late 90s, early 2000s. You were managing the inkjet division of Kodak, right? Early on as a part of this, and then kind of went into various roles there. I'll tell you, and again, I'm just kind of curious some of the like things that stick out about those days, because I have to imagine, this is really for that industry in particular. You were there, hindsight's 2020, right? And I've had some other guests, I'll share some stories later where they were at different pivot points with companies too. Like, what are some of the memories you have about those days as you're seeing the internet come about? You're seeing like how important it is. You're seeing other kind of digital printing and the PDF and these things come about. Like, what are some of the conversations that are happening at this point around Kodak, which is this iconic brand for so long, that again, I can imagine really had to be smart and think quite a bit over that 99 to late 2000s period.
Yeah, and that was and first of all, many, many great memories from the Kodak days. Fantastic people, fantastic company. And, just to clarify, I was the leader of the European side of the NCAD business there. But Kodak, if you look at history there, a huge behemoth of a company that made their money out of film, a technology that lasted for them almost 100 years. They had 100 years almost of fantastic earnings out of that film annuity stream. And then, of course, when they realized that film was being eaten by the world of digital, they had to shift the whole business. But to shift a company of that size to something new they never quite made it, in that iteration. And so there are a number of almost startup businesses in the digital world. They were far-sighted enough to invest in digital businesses like NCAD and like digital print, but they could never grow them quite to the size they needed to get out from that overhang of all the cost and everything associated with that big, film business. So I think Kodak as a company, there's some great case studies to be written, and I'm sure some people will be writing some books on the history of the brand and everything else. But they kind of were never able to replace that income stream of film with something new, and they've kind of reinvented themselves now in a different way. But it's a very, very different company. But my overarching memories of them are great ones, because a lot of fantastic people, a lot of creative people there, and as always, people are the heartbeat of the organization.
Yeah. Are there any specific memories you have that you look back and you're like, this was a mistake? Like, and again, like, and it's not about just those. And I'll tell you, we had a pretty, I don't know if it's iconic, but we've had a couple of moments on the show where we've talked to CEOs, executives. There's two that stand out, but the one that really stands out is we had the person at the time was I think she was the COO, or maybe she was the president. I think she's president or COO of Blockbuster in like 2001 or 2002. And Reed Hastings, was the founder of Netflix, approached Blockbuster about basically Netflix being blockbuster.com. And the CEO of Blockbuster is like, nah, nah, we're going to keep doing this. And, looking back, she was able to say, like, I remember sitting there going, like, we have to, kind of innovate. And I'm just curious, are there any like memories or conversations around Kodak that you have where there was like a pivotal moment or something that really sticks out as, things could have went left versus right?
Yeah, and I think you already made the point. Hindsight is 2020, and I wasn't in the inner circle of being party to many of those decisions at the very senior level, but you see them obviously from the floor, and there were a few. So Kodak tried to reinvent themselves, and one of the things they did was they decided at one point that they were going to go and compete head to head with the desktop printer companies, people like HP, who kind of own that market. And on the face of it, that's kind of an interesting decision, because printers generate an annuity stream from the ink or the toner, and that's a very similar play to cameras and film, if you think about it. A camera, you sell a camera, then you get the annuity stream from the film. That was the Kodak business model. And so Kodak said, well, hey, we could do something similar with desktop printers. We could kind of take on HP, and we'll win, and we'll make all this money on the annuity stream of ink. And but of course, it was something they'd never done before. And HP had obviously been building printers, and others had been building printers for many, many years. And so they were never able to kind of be a serious player in that market. So although they tried and they made significant investment in that desktop space, they were never able to really crack it. And that was probably one of the big ones, because I don't know the amount of money that was thrown at the venture, but it was really significant. Couple of others that come to mind, Kodak had a fantastic chemicals business. Kodak Chemicals, again, spawned off the film world, had a very, very significant chemicals business. That was sold when, the digital world started to take off. The world would always need chemicals. So, with hindsight, you could say, well, maybe they should have hung on to the chemicals business, because chemicals are always needed in the world. There's always a market for it. And they were a leader in that space. So those were two of the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and especially, again, I think it's just tough with a lot of businesses, and candidly, like through the pandemic and even now when we're in this kind of, blip and we don't know kind of where the bottom is. I think this is where you see businesses either make tough decisions or not make tough enough decisions. And we saw companies through the pandemic that, made hard pivots and did things that, it's easier to turn a decent sized ship than an oil tanker. for sure. But I think, a lot of companies right now, for people listening, I think it's just more important than ever to just think about, the golden goose or whatever it is that got you here may not be the thing that's going to get you, to the next tier in 15 years. I think Marvel Comics is another kind of iconic example of that, right? Where most people don't know Marvel Comics actually basically went into bankruptcy before they did kind of the deal with Disney and the movies and those things as well. So, and then you're like, wait, what? Like, how is that possible? And they had to pivot. They stopped hiring comics and they started hiring film writers. And sometimes that can be easier said than done, right? It's easy to look back at these decisions as, easy ones.
For sure. And the speed of change is happening so much faster now. You technology shifts are just happening so fast. It's really difficult to keep up with it. So, the disruptors can come in and move very nimble. What was it? Somebody once said, probably Warren Buffett, elephants can't tap dance. So, they don't, to your point, an oil tanker can't turn round on a dime.
That's right. And then what made you want to go and start IBML, right? So, I mean, you had a very successful corporate world, and you had a very successful, role there, and got a chance to an opportunity to do a lot of things. What made you want to take over as the CEO and president? What was it about that opportunity in particular that, you realized like this is the right thing for me?
Yeah. So it was a really easy decision because IBML was a company I'd admired for many, many years. Started by a family, the Murphy family, who had some really wonderful ideas, very disruptive around making the world's fastest, most intelligent digitization systems. And, Classic started in the garage story. And I'd known the company for a number of years. And in fact, I'd been part of the team that had bought IBML into Europe with Kodak. And so while I was at Kodak, we bought the IBML brand into Kodak as a reseller. So we resold the IBML technology. And so I got very close to the company. I knew them. I knew the technology. And when the opportunity presented itself to join them in the role of CEO, I really didn't have to think twice because I saw them as very much a sleeping giant. And they'd come a long way, but the market was significantly larger than they were addressing at the time. And so, and still is, by the way. So that pace of digital transformation, if you talk to companies across the world, a significant percentage of them are still very, very early in their digitization processes. And so the work that IBML can do for them is very interesting. So that, the intelligent document processing market is billions of dollars big, and it's getting bigger every day. And so I'm, very excited to be with IBML. We've got I'm lucky enough to work with a fantastic group of people, and loving every day.
And what were some of the trends, I guess? And again, obviously, getting into kind of the AI world as well too, in terms of kind of your, I guess like trends and what the work that IBML does. How have you seen that space evolve in particular? Because I feel like there's no shortage of artificial intelligence, machine learning, that, let's be honest, is just glorified if this then that. How have you seen this space evolve since 2016, right? And obviously, even at Kodak, like you said, you've known them and worked with them, but over the last 6 years, what have been some of the big changes you've seen in this AI world? Because there's no shortage of companies talking about it, but I think there is a shortage of companies that are doing like really interesting or actual AI type work.
Yeah, and I think the key here is you're absolutely right. There's a huge amount of companies selling everything with an AI wrapper on it, and you stick the words AI on something, and it becomes trendy, whatever. But I think the key these days is artificial intelligence has got to the stage where the companies that are doing well with it are those that are providing a very meaningful outcome to the user and making it simple and intuitive. And so providing a very real business outcome, but turning it from what was maybe a dark art, something in a black box that people didn't know how it worked, to being something that was much more user friendly, but would deliver a business outcome. You know, that's the key. And I think the key is combining two things. It's combining artificial intelligence with human intelligence, where you can actually help, not replace the human, but actually help the human do their job more effectively, more efficiently, faster, and easier. That's where AI has a place, not in replacing the human, but in helping the human. So my view of AI and the future of AI is it's AI plus HI, artificial intelligence plus human intelligence coming together for a better outcome.
I love that. Yeah, and I think, I mean, part of the, I think AI adoption goes into what you're talking about too, that I think we're still very early if you think about things in a much longer, although they are evolving so quickly too. It's kind of a mix of these two things. So the evolution is happening faster, where what I see in my kind of sales and marketing world is that there's not, I wouldn't say a distrust for the AI or, you know, recommendations or predictability. But I would say it's like, you know, our human brain can't evolve at the speed of technology. You know, I think we've passed, what was it, Murphy's Law, right? The technology doubles every, 18 months or whatever. I think we've blown through that at this point. And I think what I see a lot of people struggling with is to keep up with the application. And what I mean by that is that, you know, these tools exist that can do X, Y, and Z, but we as people, our brain has evolved through experiences that didn't have this technology, and we had success. And so I see a lot of organizations and departments struggling to implement technology in a way that isn't, you know, them kind of still defaulting back to like manual workarounds or, you know, automated workarounds versus, you know, intelligent workarounds. How do you see companies, because you get a chance to see this firsthand with your clients, how do you see companies getting over that? You know, companies or individuals, because a lot of this is you don't know what you don't know. I think a lot of people out there don't even know what artificial intelligence is capable of. So they're just like, well, I guess we'll just keep doing things this way. And so how are leading companies or teams or departments, you know, really thinking about upskilling the mindset of their teams to be able to leverage these types of technologies, period? Because I do feel like it's kind of the concept of what's possible that a lot of people are struggling with. And then maybe the second part is, you know, are there use cases that you all have been working on with clients that are, you know, have really, I guess, you know, been kind of eye-opening or transformative for them? I'm sure there's lots of those, but, you know, some ones that really stand out.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things there. And I think one of the first ones is companies very often don't know what the technology can really do for them, but they do understand their existing processes, to your point. And so what we try and do when we're trying to help the clients is to get them to think beyond their process and their steps in their existing process and think about the business outcome. Because we hear this thing time and time again. They say, hey, help us automate our process, or help us digitize our process, or whatever. And we sometimes say to them, hey, park that, forget your process for a second, unlearn that process, because all you'll just do the same thing you're doing manually in an automated fashion in the same number of steps. You'll get no real benefit. But start with the outcome in mind. What's the outcome you want to achieve? And then unlearn everything. Start with a blank sheet of paper and say, what can technology do for you to help you get to that outcome better? And I think that's the key.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think sometimes it's very difficult. I found it's difficult for people. I think sometimes suspend belief. You know, and you know, I see this in my own org, and I see this in our clients' orgs too, where I think sometimes they struggle to say, you know, not juxtapose it against like, well, this is how we're doing it now. It's like, that's, you know, get out. And so how do you help people get out of that mindset, right? I think it's one of those things. It's like it's kind of not easy to say, but because I know this is something I talk about quite a bit with my team and my organization and our clients. How do you get out of that mindset, or how do you start the process of suspending belief in something where people are so entrenched in their day to day?
Yeah, and I think the start to that is the time you spend at the front end of the project. And we see very often companies make a decision. They say, okay, we're going to digitize, we're going to buy this from you, and we're going to do all these things. It's going to be wonderful. When can you install it? And so taking a little bit of time at that front end to kind of rein them back a little bit and say, okay, it's fantastic that you're taking this step with us, and we'll hold your hand and we'll guide you and we'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you all throughout this process. But let's just take some time at the start to say, what's the outcome? What's the business outcome you're trying to deliver? And then let's map a path to getting there with the technology. And if you sometimes find that you spend almost as much time on that planning stage as you do in the implementation stage, because if you can get that planning stage right, the implementation side will go a lot quicker, a lot faster. And you've got to keep reminding people, Jake, of, hey, this is the outcome we've all signed up for. This is why you're doing this. Because it's very easy as you start to unpack the technology. Oh, it does this. Oh, and it does this. And all of a sudden you can get kind of, you're going sideways through the trees, and you have to kind of, again, keep pointing people back to, this is the outcome we all agree. Let's do that. Let's do that first. So start with the outcome in mind. Spend a lot of time at the front end of the process on the planning, and then the delivery side will go a lot better.
I love that. I think in a world where, again, it's such a, this is not a new adage, right? The old adage is what? Measure twice, cut once, right?
Yep. Not in my house, Jake. If you see my DIY, that's not how it works.
Exactly.
Just measure once, cut at least twice.
That's exactly it. That's why we were trying to do this big backyard project. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just not, I can't do this. Like, I just don't, I know myself. And so again, it's finding your strengths. I have other strengths that I can go and leverage. But I do feel like for a lot of people out there, I hope they really listen to that, because in today's world, you've got move fast, break shit. You've got, this very much this kind of mindset of, and again, we work a lot in the sales technology space in particular. And, it's like, let's just get to deployment as fast as possible. And then what happens? 3 to 6 months later, they're calling us because they didn't deploy it correctly. And they're like, why aren't people using it? We trained them on it. It's like, okay, well, that's not how change works. It's not like you plug in something. If it runs behind the scenes, that's a whole other thing. But I do think it's such an important lesson for today's day and age that even though things are speeding up and the rate of change is speeding up, the way that you implement change or new processes successfully is by planning in advance. And we see that on our own engagements. I'm sure you all do as well too, that sometimes you get pulled in and then you regret it immediately later. So everyone, when you think about, maybe it's a big project you have on your plate, maybe it's something you've been putting off, etc. Just start with the planning. Start with the end in mind. I think there's a kind of two, beautiful analogies, Martin. Again, when you start with the outcome in mind, and then whenever you know that the planning period might take as long as the deployment, I think a lot of heads are bursting right now, or like a lot of people are getting anxious just thinking about this. But it's either you deal with it now or you deal with it later. And an extra few hours or 10 or 20 hours now, I promise you, is much better than the 70, 100 to 200 plus hours of headaches it's going to cause you down the road. So I think a great opportunity for people to reflect on maybe some projects or things that they have. What I want to spend the last kind of part of the conversation talking about here is, you talk a lot about this idea of the great resignation versus the great reinvention. And so let's spend a little bit of time there, because it was such a very interesting point in time. I think there'll be books written about this as well. We had this phase, 2021, right? We come out of COVID, man, everything is rolling. It's this, I quit, we're done, the great resignation. And it didn't last that long. It lasted like 9 to 10 months. Then all of a sudden the economy punched us all in the mouth a little bit and said, wait, maybe it's not, all up and to the right. And so now we're kind of in this next phase of what that is. People still enjoy the remote work. People still want to work a little bit differently, but it's not just, everyone quitting and freelancing, which is what I think we thought the Great Resignation would look like. And so when you say the Great Reinvention, like what do you see both with, kind of in your work? How do you see this manifesting? But I think it's a really interesting point in time for a lot of people who are thinking about, their next move or how to reinvent themselves in their own role.
Yeah, agreed. And I think you're absolutely right. And, the labor statistics that have just come out show that in the US, there's as many people in work, maybe even a little bit more than there were pre-pandemic. So these people haven't disappeared out of the workforce. This philosophy of the Great Resignation and people disappearing out of the workforce clearly hasn't happened. But to your point, I think what did happen is this whole situation with COVID, it made us all stop and think. It made us all stop and think and reevaluate what was important in our lives. And a big part of the world went to home working, remote working, something that hadn't been done on this scale and this size ever before. And people started to work remotely and from home, and their whole work-life balance changed. They were able to walk the kids to the bus stop. They were able to pick the kids up from school. They were able to log in and out and work a little bit more on their own hours when they wanted to work. Maybe they wanted to work in the evenings and still get the work done. All of these things were happening. And this new way of working, people tried it, they did it, and they quite liked it. And so this push to get back to the office, and we've been as guilty of that as anyone. This push to get back to the office, people kind of dug their heels in and said, well, wait a minute, we're not sure we want that anymore. And so I think one of the big changes that's happened is this: people want more flexibility. People took stock of their lives and they said, well, what's important to us? A lot of people said flexibility. It's the ability to control their own destiny, to work how they want to work. And so what we've tried to do at ibml is we've said, okay, we're going to still hold you accountable. Everyone's accountable for their job, but we're going to focus again on the outcomes. This is the outcome that your job needs to deliver. We're not going to tell you how to do it. If you want to work 2 days a week at home and 3 days in the office, or 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, if you have the tools to be able to do that, and as long as you deliver us the outcomes, we're perfectly fine with that. And I think that's the key. People are this philosophy of the Great Reinvention. I like the term the Great Reinvention because people took stock and they said, again, what's important to me? Maybe this is a time for a new job. Maybe I should be looking for a new job. And they're out there. There are more jobs out there right now than there are people. There's, I think the number was 10 million plus open positions in the US right now. That's a big number of jobs out there. And there's less than 300,000 people unemployed. So that's more jobs than people. So if you want a new job, if you're looking for a new job, now is the time. And a lot of people have taken that opportunity. And people have also taken the opportunity to improve themselves and to learn new things. And I think about what is important to people in this new world. It's that flexibility. It's the work-life balance. It's the ability to juggle their home and work life. And it's the ability to learn and try new things. And I think your comment about the freelancers and the self-employed, they wanted to try something new. Maybe they were fed up working for someone else and they thought, hey, I want to go out on my own. And the pandemic and post-COVID gave them a chance to do that. And you know what? I don't believe we're going to go back to exactly the way it was before. The world has changed. And for employers, like IBML, we've got to make sure in this new environment, we've got to make sure that we're an attractive choice to employees. We've got to make sure that we're giving them what they need. And it's not just money. I think money is something that motivates to maybe bring somebody on board. But once they're there, it's other things that they're looking for, that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of something bigger, a higher purpose, and the chance for progression and doing things their own way, that flexibility. So, Jake, I think that's the way the world has changed. I think as employers, we have to embrace that it's not going to go back to how it was before. And maybe the pendulum has swung a little bit in favor of the employee. in this new world of more jobs than people, maybe that kind of shift has happened. So we've got to make sure that we're really giving the employees what they want.
I love that. And I would say too, on the flip side, I think as employees, I think a lot of employees are also maybe not used to this world. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of people try to reinvent themselves by leaving the company, even if they like the company, right? Let's say they're happy. They're like, I like my coworkers, et cetera. But, this role, or, they're like, oh, maybe I want to go do my own thing or whatever that might be. I would really encourage employees to also think about employers becoming more flexible. Means if you're in a place that you like, even small employers, even us, it's been interesting in the last year. I mean, maybe you've had this happen too, Martin. I've had some employees that have left, and it's great to do this. It's this is the type of opportunity, that I really wanted. And some of those, we didn't have that. And then those opportunities, it's like amazing. Like we don't have that. So amazing. So happy for you. And then maybe they contract with us later. And others, it's, they leave because they're like, yeah, like this part of the role, I really want to do X. And those are the ones where I think as an employer, I feel like we made a mistake, but also put some of the onus on the employees as well too, that you can reinvent yourself. I think employers are more open than ever whereas before maybe it wasn't. So as employees, we've been conditioned to be like, put your head down, do what you're told, blah, blah, blah. But I think now, that paradigm is changing. I think employers, and I can speak for myself, we are beyond open, and we've got really wild success stories where people have come to us and said, look, this isn't it. I think this is my thing. And it's like, okay, well, let's go do that. If that's what gets you excited in the morning, then let's go help you to do that. And so I think as we reinvent the workplace, I think more and more people need to realize you can shape your own role. You can shape what your fate is to some extent at your company. And you don't have to just be this like beholden to what the role is. And so I'd be curious, how you think about that part of it, which is, people reinventing themselves in their roles or in their companies.
Yes, I love that. I absolutely love that, because we all know how much it costs to bring on board a new employee and to train them and to develop them, not even just to do the job, but just to fit into the business and the culture. And so if you can get more out of an existing employee and they can get more job satisfaction, they'll be even more productive for you, and it'll help they'll add more value to the company, and they'll add more value to themselves. And someone once said to me, I had a very smart guy who worked for me once, and so investing in people is the key here. And someone once said to him, they said, hey, what happens if we spend all this time and money training somebody and then they leave? And, my colleague said, well, what happens if we don't and they stay? Which I think is incredibly wise words. So so we have to invest in people and give people a chance. And we have to look at the people that work for us already, because they have valuable skills and experience that they've learned in the company. If we can help them advance and help them learn new skills, they'll be more valuable to us. They'll get more out of it. They'll progress. They'll earn more money. It's an absolutely virtuous circle. So I'm absolutely with you 100%.
I love that. And I think too, it really has felt like we've just been stuck in this chicken and egg problem for at least the last, I would say maybe like late 2000s, early 2010s, where as churn becomes higher and people are staying shorter, companies are becoming less and less likely, I think, to invest, which is then causing people to leave. But then churn, they're like, why are we investing in these? And I do feel like exactly you said, look, as a CEO, and you as a CEO, I can control one side of that coin, so I'm going to control that side. I'm going to try to control, like, do we have a good experience for people when they do start, et cetera, and do we have a good experience for people to grow as they progress? So I do think it's really important that as a company, as you hear this, that you, like you said, can you afford not to invest? If you look at the total cost of a lost person with ramp time, and I'm sure you've had those people too, Martin, that have left, and you're like, oh my gosh, like we've invested so much time, and it's like, imagine if you just invested a little bit more of the right time with that person. And so, Martin, as we wrap up here, I'll ask you the same question I ask everyone. What are you most excited about for the future? Meaning, whether it's personal, professional, what are the trends or things that you see where you're, most excited, where you're like, hey, this is a direction, this is a new way I think we're headed, etc.
So I'm going to lurch slightly to the philosophical with this. So what I'm most excited about is I'm a great believer in people, and I'm a great believer in the human race. I'm a great believer in the power of positivity, and I'm a great believer in ultimately the power of good. And so if we look at the speed of change, I ultimately, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world right now. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of uncertainties, and there's a lot of things that are making people feel nervous. Whether it's the economy, whether it's war, whether it's the price of utilities, whatever it is, there's a lot going on right now that I think lead people to be worried. I'm a huge believer that ultimately is the human race will always overcome. And I believe that there's far more good out there than there is bad. And I believe in the power of people and the power of positivity. And I believe that ultimately good is always going to triumph. So that's what makes me most excited. And we've all got to look. And for me, I look for the good in every day, no matter what's going on. And that's, Jake, maybe not a direct answer to your question, but that's what excites me the most, really.
And yeah, well, and I do feel like, again, it's important for people to understand that, look, there's many times throughout our history where there's been difficult times as well, too. And I think when you're in it, and especially if you've only been through one or two cycles, or, I think it can be very difficult to keep that mindset, to really understand it, myself included. I'm 42 now, so I've had the opportunity, I don't know if it's good or bad, to see multiple, recessions and things happen and in the world and in, the finance world that, appear at the time to be like, how is this ever going to rebound? I think back to the housing in late 2000s and, some other things. But, I think that that's a great mindset for people to leave with is just, what can you do to control what you can control? What can you do to stay positive? I'm not a big fan of hope as a strategy for a lot of things, but I do think if history tells us anything, it's that, you can have some hope that things are going to change, and then maybe the cycle will come the other way, and then they'll change again. And so, I think for a lot of people out there, you have to
believe. You have to believe. And I think if you look at the history of humans, we always move forward. We always move forward. We have these little roadblocks, little road bumps, speed bumps in the road, but we always move forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what a great comment to wrap up on. And so, Martin, I want to say a big thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. I know what I love are the conversations where I walk away feeling positive and excited and fired up. And I know I'm definitely walking away from this conversation feeling that way. And I really hope all the listeners are, as well too. I think, both your experiences and I think your outlook on, humanity, technology is something that I think everyone will be able to both relate to and hopefully take as a point of motivation going forward. So big thank you for joining me, Martin.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it too.
All right. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show. Thank you everyone again for listening to another episode. If you are listening all the way to the end, I hope you have left a review. I hope that you make sure that you're following or subscribing on your favorite podcast listening apparatus. We'll be back next Thursday. And again, make sure to check out the Monday episodes as well too. A lot of people are really enjoying these kind of mini episode Mondays. So make sure to tune in, subscribe, and leave a review.